Well, hello and thank you for joining us today for Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our premier solutions provider for Alpha Software Solutions, as well as the founder of Giant Killer Training. Today, Dion is going to be covering the powerful, versatile, and lightweight Viewbox Control. And I believe he's going to be hooking it up against API data. Might be wrong. We'll find out in a moment. But he's also here to answer your questions. So you can go ahead and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so let's get started. Hello, Dion. Are you there?
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
Sure. Thank you.
All right.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you everybody for taking the time to visit with us this week. I know it's a little bit crazy out there, but hopefully we can, use this productive time to help you move forward and use some of the amazing capabilities built into Alpha Anywhere. So today is a follow-on, and we're actually going to be focusing on Viewbox for a couple more weeks too. This is such an incredibly powerful component that really I don't think has been tapped to the level I think we can get it to. And so that's why we want to, I've had such great response, Dave. I don't know if you've seen it, but the emails coming in and everything else from people who are watching these series on Viewboxes, they just want to know more. And so we're going to dive into more detailed on that. It's just really neat stuff. And the two things that make the Viewbox really powerful in my mind are, first and foremost, is how flexible it is, but also just it unlocks the ability to create really gorgeous user interfaces. So we're going to cover a lot of those different aspects there. But before we go further, I would like you to go ahead and, if you have any questions that have been burning, put them into our Q&A panel here. Also, you can send those questions to guides at Alpha Software. And we actually had a really good week on questions. We're actually backlogged on getting these questions answered. So we have received your questions on guides, and we're tuning them into this presentation here today, but also try to cover them and get back to you as soon as possible on there. We really appreciate you sending in those requests, and please continue to do so. We really want that to happen. So real quick before I go into the actual demonstration, I wanted to go ahead and make sure that everybody knows that, Alpha DevCon 2020 in the October framework is coming up. So you can register. Actually, I'm in my development environment. I was just launching, just wanted to show you we have an announcement right there. We got full days of training with everybody, the team, along with conference sessions. You'll hear all the new stuff, the roadmap, the other fun stuff you have there. And we'll also have back channel, which is really cool, which means that we'll have a lot of other people tapped into the environment. So when people have questions, we have the developer community. We have also our developers and other experts online to help you out. And the Alpha staff will be monitoring that. So we're really going to make this a very productive event. And what's kind of interesting is, again, I think a little foresight there, going virtual. We're seeing everything, Microsoft Build, WWDC from Apple, all those. So we're going to actually be watching those and kind of keeping an eye on how people are doing these virtual conferences and seeing if we could tap into some of the best practices, because those companies have a huge amount of resources. They're not as nimble as us often. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play it out, what they do, and how we can adapt that to really make this an incredibly successful event. So if you've already signed up, thank you. We look forward to seeing there. We're working very hard to put together the content for that. If you would like information, we kind of have our content kind of structured, but we'd love to hear from you about what you want to see, what's valuable, what's important. And if you haven't signed up, get online, get signed up ASAP. We are looking forward to seeing you there. So I'm going to go ahead and continue opening that up. So let's continue today. So we're really talking about user interfaces, and obviously data-driven user interfaces. If I were just doing HTML, CSS, I'd do Photoshop and then drop it into, a parser or slicer, and boom, I've got a static website or WordPress or something like that. But you start running into where you're doing transactional systems, you want the kind of combination between a very powerful ability to interact with backend databases in a transactional method, but along with that, you also want the ability to present very beautiful interfaces. So we're going to extend our discussion today about the Viewbox control. And the Viewbox control, and the reason I picked this photo is that, that HTML and CSS in the left corner, it allows you to use the best of HTML and CSS and all the powerful capabilities that exist today with data. And so what we want to focus on today, we're going to focus on that a little bit more of the styling next week or our next session. Today, I want to dive into a little bit more of the data. Last week, we showed how you could connect your Viewbox into a backend database and actually provide it arguments so you could filter based on that. And that went really well, really smooth. And we saw some cool things, had some really good follow-up questions. But today, what we're going to talk about is another built-in capability is the ability to connect to a backend API to use the Viewbox as a front end on your API. So I'm going to go through a demonstration today showing you how you can go through and create a Viewbox, tie it right to an API, and then use all the power of the Viewbox to leverage that information. Now, one of the neat things about this demonstration, what was a lot of fun when I put it together, was the fact that, first you need to have an API to call. And there are a lot of public ones. I've talked about those, but I said, come on, this is ridiculous. Why don't we use Alpha Cloud providing an API? So I did a very simple project where I built a backend API. Took me 10 minutes all to get everything ready and up on the cloud. And it kind of demonstrated to me how powerful the Alpha Cloud is because I didn't have to worry about servers and everything else. I could just build my code, sling it or deploy it up on the cloud, and boom, I have it running. Now I'm doing a few other little things to optimize it. I'm tying a domain name to it and some other things, which I'll update you on next week. But the really powerful capability was the ability to just create an API and deploy it in a very short period of time. And then I could then move forward to go ahead and build the front end on it. So what I like to do is this will be a two-step process. First, I'm going to show you a little bit about how I built that API and what it does and demonstrate it running. And then I'm going to dive back into the Viewbox to show how I then use that API. And this is a really powerful design structure. And for the number one reason is the world's going to APIs. That's it's just how it goes. The API is very powerful because it disconnects your user interfaces from your database. Now, you'll notice last week in our demonstration last week, we connected directly to a database and then we passed arguments into that database. Well, that's great. And feel free to use it. I'm not dissuading you from doing it. If you got that, go for it. But let's say 6 months from now, all of a sudden you're doing a lot of massive changes to your backend system, adding functionality, et cetera, and you start mucking with your databases and you start changing them. Well, if you built your API component, if you built your front end components directly tied to a database, then you have to go through rework and other things like that to make sure you don't break your existing ones. Well, with this technology and with this process, now I can have that API in the middle. So I could go and change my backend data structures to my heart's desire. And then I could remap it in my API so all my user interfaces just keep working with no problem there. And we'll talk more about that in the future and show an example of how that would work and what you could do to do that. So again, kind of tying two things together, but I think they're very powerful because it really, I think, defines the paradigm for how people are building systems now and going in the future. So I'm going to jump back into my development environment here. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to open up that's there. Hold on one second, everybody. I just need to jump on to my other virtual machine where I have that. So you're seeing my current, that's my local development machine. So let me go here. There we go. And okay. So I've just brought up my other project. So, okay. So when I decided to build this, I said, okay, I'm going to eat my own dog food, a classic term of, instead of using someone else's API, I'm going to build my own API. So I built an alpha project here. So this is a separate project that I built. And all this project is going to do is create my API. And it's a very simple API. So let me walk you through it real quick. First is that I created a connection string to a SQL database or a MySQL database that I have up in the cloud. It's on my demo environment there. Now, what's cool is this could be, say, an Amazon RDS instance or an Azure SQL Server instance. It really doesn't matter. So I connected it, but I want it to be a cloud database. You'll notice not an Access database. It's actually a cloud database. Then once I did that, I went ahead and went in and created a class. Now, I'm not going to go into the code right now. We can come back and watch that there. But I created what is called a HTTP focused class definition for a REST API. And basically, it's just a simple function. All this function does, and I actually, Alpha actually built this for me. I did the Genie XBasic SQL Actions code generator, and I use this to just build this code right here. So all this does is it makes a call to my database, my connection string, grabs some data from the product table, and then returns that as JSON. That's all this class does. And then what it does, it also returns what's called a status 200 that shows if there has been an error or anything else. So again, very simple is I'm using my basic XBasic skills and I just construct it a little differently. Now, once I've created that, I went ahead and said, let's create a web service for it. So I created a web service, and in here, I just pointed to that class I built and to the products there. And that was it. I mean, I literally, Alpha wrote the code for me to actually query the database. Then Alpha now did this API thing, and now I have an API that basically when you call it, you can call products and get a list of products in JSON. So I'm going to go here to live test the API. And I'm going to go ahead and start this here. And this allows me to exercise it. So I want to show you what this API looks like, and then we'll be able to dive into the other pieces there. So this is running in live preview on my local machine here, and it'll be up in a moment. But this is using the Swagger Open API specification. And it shows me, in this case, I have an API with only one endpoint here for products. I can click Get here. This tells me how it works. Basically, there's no parameters. There's a 200 code if everything's successful. I can actually even try it out. So I can actually, once I've built it, I can try it out. And you'll notice that now we have a can't execute here. I'm going to click Execute. That calls my local API, not Alpha Cloud yet, but it calls my local API here in there. And you'll see, and I'm sorry, let me go up here. Oh, sorry, I went a little too fast. You'll see that it called that API that I built. It called then the function below it, and then it just returned a whole bunch of information from the database for the products. So it can literally, when I built this, it took me 10 minutes max to build this API. Now, we can talk in future sessions about how to authenticate this so people just can't hit it without a token or something like that. We can also talk about auditing, but I wanted something really simple. And in fact, in a few moments, I'll give you the URL and you can play with it. It's up and live on Alpha Cloud. So I did this. I made sure everything's working great. I go, okay, fabulous. I just built this. It's working great. So now what I do is I can go into Alpha Cloud and I can go ahead and I create a publishing profile here, and I can go ahead and edit that profile. I'm not going to go in details, but basically this took maybe another 5 or 10 minutes to set up. I have my account for that. And I went in and I set up Alpha Cloud. Again, a little bit more on there, but the nice thing is that it basically walks you through setting up an application and then some deployment information. But once I did that, I click OK, and basically it took this code and put it up on Alpha Cloud. I didn't have to go get a server, didn't have to go set up, anything. It just takes care of all that for me so I can do it. Now, what's the benefit of that? Now I have that up on the cloud. And in fact, let me run over here and go back to my desktop here. And I'm going to open up Postman. So if you don't have Postman, please go ahead and if you're going to start doing API stuff, go get it and download it. It's free. They have a paid version that does a lot more fancy stuff, but it's an incredibly easy to use, powerful tool for exercising APIs. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. This is my endpoint here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to go ahead and put that into the chat area here. There you go. So if you know what you're doing, knock yourself out. Have fun.
So we can play with it ourselves. That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Boom. That's now available. You can't edit data. I mean, we're going to do some things to show out editing and stuff like that, but you'll pull it up. So what Postman does is basically allows me to run APIs in a controlled fashion. So you'll notice here I'm doing what's called a GET request because I'm not really putting data up. I'm basically just calling this API endpoint. So I can click send, and you'll see in a moment it calls Alpha Cloud, and there is the data that came down. And you can see I can look at it, I can test it here. So it's really handy for testing. I kind of use this a lot, just kind of make sure everything's going. In the future, like if you have authorization, you can put an authorization key in it. If you're doing something like like submitting a post-transaction body, but it's really, really handy. But feel free to exercise that. That's up and running. Now, the cool thing too is that I don't have to worry about if all of a sudden everybody in the world started hitting this API endpoint, Alpha Cloud will automatically scale stuff for me. So if it starts seeing that my server's getting overloaded, it's going to start adding capacity for me to be able to handle and and make sure that I'm reducing or be able to handle the load that goes onto it. So again, all I have to worry about is building the code, putting it up there. The rest is taken care of. Okay, so that's kind of like the overview. I went ahead and built, as again, I built my class that made the call. I then wrapped it in a web service, and then I deployed it to Alpha Cloud. And now, as we have here, it's up and running and I can use it. Now I'm going to shift gears. If you have questions on that stuff, we'll be glad to answer those. But I'm going to shift gears now to say, okay, great, this is up and running. How do I then use it in a Viewbox? And that's the core of our demonstration today. But I want to give you a background. And the reason why is I'm going to be using this more and more and more. And we're going to have these up and running. The Alpha team has put this together so we can have it there and use it for demonstrations and things like that. It's really, really fun. So these will be up there. I'm not going to I'll try to not mess them up too much. I'll be enhancing them and stuff. Like for instance, I'd love to be able to say filter this project or products. And so we'll go through an example of how to filter it and then tie it to an API or to a Viewbox. So you could have like a filtered set of items. So we'll have fun with that down the road. But I wanted to keep this super simple that basically we had a single API that pulled a list of products out of a database table and then displayed those as JSON here. So let's go ahead, and now I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to go into my project here locally, and I'm going to go ahead, and first thing's important, I don't have to do a connection string. I don't have to worry about a connection string. And the reason why is the endpoint is my connection string. I am going to be calling that endpoint, and that endpoint is then on the server side going to handle going to my database and stuff. So there's number one. Let's say I move that database across the world to a different provider. Guess what? My API doesn't change. If I modify it, I can keep the API the same. It's really, really nice. So I'm going to click New here. I'm going to go to Web Component. I'm going to create a UX component like I did last week. And I'm just going to use a blank one here. So this is going to create a blank UX. Now I'm going to go to my controls. And the first thing I always like to do is put in my panel card. And I'm going to go ahead and put in a panel header. I'm not going to use a control bar here. I would probably use that normally, but I just want to put in a little piece of static text that says API example. By the way, if you want this control after we're done, send an email into guides@alphasoftware.com. We will have that ready to go. So API example, Viewbox. And the cool thing too is, guess what? It's going to work because the API is up and most importantly, Alpha Cloud is 24/7 of just a workhorse environment. It's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and say API data. You can see I tested it ahead of time just because I didn't want to screw you guys up. Okay, Viewbox _UX. Okay. So we've done all that. Nothing happens yet, but I'm going to go ahead and now go to data controls. I'm going to go here to Viewbox. I'm going to add a Viewbox. And I'm just going to call this Viewbox API. You can call it anything you want, but from there. And again, if I highly recommend, we've got up on, or we've recorded last week's demonstration. So if you want to connect it to a database, you can show it there. Feel free to grab that. So I'm going to go into the Viewbox builder. As we talked about, there's tons of great data. You can load sample view boxes. You can click here to get data on it. But I'm going to skip over here to data source. So data source is where this Viewbox is going to get its information. And as we mentioned last year, you could actually use Viewboxes as pure HTML controls. It's very lightweight. So if you just wanted to paste some HTML in there, static, but not connected with data, you could do it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say it is actually a data driven. That means it's HTML generated by merging data into a template. And now that I've done that, it gives me my options of where to get that information. So last week we used database query, but now I'm going to use REST API. Cool. So now that I've selected REST API, when this Viewbox runs, and we have some control over it, it's going to make a call to that API endpoint and grab that data. So we need to tell it, well, where are you going to get that data? So the first thing we want to do is, and I'll come back and talk about this in a moment, let's go to API endpoint. So I am going to go here and open this up. This is where the endpoint of where that will be. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to copy this. Now, one of the reasons I use Postman is I want to make sure I have my endpoint stuff figured out and working. Once you have that there, I can just come in here and just paste it and handle it within there. So I'm just pasting that endpoint in right here. And you'll notice, by the way, just since we're here, this is the default web URL that Alpha Cloud gave me when I created that, but you can map your own. And in fact, I was working on that this week, but I screwed something up. I had a really cool little URL that we could use. So you can, instead of using this one, you can create your own mycoolcompany.com/API instead of, this long thing. And then when Alpha Cloud gets that message, it says, oh, I'm going to this website here. So we'll get that up and running from there. But basically, I've copied that endpoint and put it here. Okay. So now that I've got that, it's asking me sample data. Now, why is it asking me for sample data? Well, when I go to build my layout, I want to be able to start manipulating and using that data. But if I don't have any sample data, then that really makes it hard to build my Viewbox in the development environment. So I'm going to click on here. Now, if I know what my JSON is, so I could go in here and copy all this stuff, or I could select it all. Let me go ahead and select all and copy that. And so I could copy that into here. But Alpha has a really cool feature called make REST call to get sample data. So it depends on the complexity of your API endpoint, but I can just click there, runs my API, and boom, there's my sample data. So now it's grabbed a static set of JSON that it's going to use during the design process. And I can actually show this in the JSON viewer so you can see what it looks like. You can see here are the records and the different record information. Pretty fun stuff. And here's the actual version of it here. So, and you can reformat the JSON. So now it looks more, vertical, a little easier to read. Here's each one of my records from here. So very powerful built into this just sample data here, and click OK. Now, I'm not using authenticated. If I am using authenticated, I could set up how this Viewbox would then pass the information for authentication. We'll cover that in the future. Custom headers, if your API requires certain headers, sometimes APIs require header information. Again, it's thought of all those pieces here. JSON path is really cool, and I'm not going to cover it here, but sometimes when you get back from APIs, for instance, if you'll notice here, it's just giving me exactly the data I want. But other APIs will do stuff like this. They'll say result. Oh, I can't edit it here, but they'll put in like a result and then they'll show you like some metadata, like did it run? Is there any problems? And then this data right here is going to be a sub-factor of that, or like a child member of that information. Well, I want this. I don't want all the top level stuff. So this JSON path allows me to say, hey, just give me a portion of the JSON that comes back, like the child records, because I don't need all the other stuff there. So pretty easy. Now we could do post-processing also with an XBasic function, which then allows you to take that JSON, manipulate it before the Viewbox actually takes it, but I've got it straight out of the API, so I'm good to go there. And then last but not least, I've got two options about rendering. Do I want to delay until I trigger it? Might be useful because you might need to set some other data before this Viewbox. But I'm going to leave this not checked, so it'll automatically render here. Okay, so I put in my API input, I got some sample data. Now when I go to fields, you notice it's using that sample data. So I can look at this information here. I can now go to my Viewbox layout and I can start building my layout. So I'm gonna make this look like a list control. So I'm gonna click add item here. I'm gonna go to containers and I'm gonna select the list row container. It's really nice. When you're building them up, it's a really good starting point. You just click OK. So you'll notice it puts in like kind of a little hard to see, but a green kind of container, very much like the UX builder. So now I can click add item again. I can go to data controls and there are my fields and I'm going to click OK there. And so these are going to show up in my container. So think of this as like building a little grid kind of scenario here. Now I've got that. I can actually literally preview it and this actually makes the call and I can kind of see what it looks like. Boom. So you'll see that's the data coming back from the API and it's treating it like a list control where you have selected items from there. So I click OK. I'm going to actually go here to properties. I'm going to make the compact theme. I'm using Alpha Blue too, but I'm going to enable compact because I want to make it look a little nicer. So I better save that since we've made lots of changes. Now watch when I hit working preview. In a few moments, it's going to render my UX and in there, it's going to make the call to the API. And there you go.
Nicely
There's
done.
my
Yeah.
data. All ready to go, coming in here, and this didn't go to a database. Now, you'll notice that I have like this, let's just go back into controls, click Viewbox API and go over here and click what's called fill container. That will expand or stretch the Viewbox API. to or that view box to consume the whole screen. So now it looks a little nicer. And it's very fast, very lightweight. This whole control right here is, and we kind of talked about it, as 100K. That's how much this control is. So when you actually move it and put it into a web browser, you're talking like instantaneous download speeds. I mean, just super fast. And your Viewbox API is very fast. Now, one of the cool things about this is that now when I hit working preview, it is making that call to my API. So if I change my database data, then it would come back with a different API with different information from there. But I want to go and show a really important aspect of this. So I'm going to go into my API here, or my Viewbox, excuse me, and I'm going to go back to the data source. And I want to draw your attention to something here called make call from server. Okay, so there are two options, server and client. So if you say server, what it's going to do is this Viewbox, when it's running on the person's web browser or mobile phone, will call back to the Alpha Anywhere environment. Alpha Anywhere app server will then make a call to that API endpoint. Once that API endpoint is coming back, then that data then is delivered back to the client, which works fine. The issue you may have is that, well, that's kind of putting a little more work on your server. So you can actually select client. You'll notice some of your options go away. Like for instance, when I had server, I could do a post-process XBasic function because the data is going through the server. But in this case, when I say client, the client is going to, oh, I have to do it here. Yep, okay. So let me go back to server. You have to make one adjustment here. Let me grab this here. Now when I go from the client, it's very similar, but now what I do is instead of defining there, I say return. There we go. So I return this. And the neat thing about this is this can be dynamically built on the fly because it's a JavaScript. So it could be looking at other controls and things like that. So now it basically will make the call directly from the person's phone or mobile or control. Now, the cool thing about that is now you have less loading on the server. The response time is actually faster because you get rid of one hop, but you have a few other little things you need to do. Like you have to make sure if that API requires authentication, you're doing some things on your side to handle it and other pieces from there. So let's go ahead and do this. And now you're not going to see a big speed difference here just because I'm using it within the development environment, but you'll see a faster response time in the browser when you go between there. So notice then, same performance, same reaction, but what this API or what this Viewbox did is called directly from my working preview directly to Alpha Cloud where I was hosting my API, and it didn't have to go through my local server here or in that. Now, one thing that's kind of cool about Alpha Cloud too, which is neat, is the fact that if you're hosting your front end and your API on Alpha Cloud, well, they're all in that same environment. So it's super lightning speed to move things around. So for instance, if I was running my app on Alpha Cloud and I had my API running on Alpha Cloud in a different app, then it's all going to happen internally on that environment. So it's super duper fast. There's just, latency is super low. But that's a little side there. So you can choose. It depends on which one you want to do. It depends on your situation, etc. The only other thing you have to be careful of is that if you're making a call directly from the wherever you're making the call, sometimes there's security restrictions on API endpoints, meaning that they only allow calls from certain domains and things like that. If it's not a public API, there may some, so you have to just take that into account that if you're calling from the mobile device, it may say, well, I don't know what this IP is. I have no idea what it is, so I'm going to reject that call. But if it's going from your server, you may have given it the IP address of your server. So the API goes, oh, I'm getting the traffic from the Alpha server. I'm expecting that. So there's just some nuances on there to be aware of to make sure you're good to go there. But again, nice performance improvement, ability to kind of take some load off of your app server. So now more and more your app server is just basically doing two things. It's serving up the content and then it's responding, say, to AJAX callbacks and other things along those lines. Now, and in fact, that's, now the neat thing is your API is doing a lot more work. So you're distributing your workload. So we'll go into that more on. I don't want to get too crazy and off the path here. But that's our demonstration for today. As you can see, The Viewbox API is very easy to use both with standard database backends, but also with the API. And now the cool thing is that, again, if I need to change anything, I can just go into my API environment, change it there, and off to the races, and maintain the same, footprint, maintain the same structure, and everybody is happy. And we'll show you a little bit more about it as we go down the road there. I'd be curious on a show of hands who grabbed that. I mean, I can literally grab this and put it into my browser because it's just an endpoint. There's no security or anything like that on it. Although I recommend you use one of these, and you'll see that this is just, it's like serving up a web page, but it's going to serve up some data in the body in terms of this JSON. Boom. So there's my data right here. So that nothing super miraculous about it. We will do a follow-on one because what you may want to do is pass this, like I only want to see one product. And so we'll do a little bit more to show you about that because you'll need to change both your API endpoint structure of how it works, but also how that information is passed into the API through the Viewbox. But I didn't want to get too crazy today, kind of set the groundwork in terms of how to do these pieces here and open it up for questions and see what people have questions about this and potentially other pieces there.
Excellent. So we have about several questions actually on
Good.
this.
Excellent.
The first one has to do with running APIs locally. The person wrote in and said that when they run their APIs locally, it seems to take several seconds before the API responds. Is that a normal thing? Is that something because it's running locally? Are APIs in fact snappy when you put them up on, say, the cloud or on a fast server?
Yeah, the answer is the second. They are insanely fast once up on because they're very lightweights. They're just little
Mhm.
little basically special web pages that run that code to look at the back end. When you're in the development environment, it's doing things like when you're running it, it's actually setting up a whole bunch of things for the debugger, whether you have it on or not. It's doing a whole bunch of things that to allow debugging, to allow code inspection, etc. So you're always going to see performance is going to be worse on the development environment than it is on your server. And the reason why is the development environment is doing a whole bunch of other housekeeping things at the same time. So don't let that
Gotcha.
dissuade you. Once you're up on the server, the response time is just like super duper fast. Like I'll go ahead and do this. Let me go here to just to show you a good way to find out how fast things are going
Oh yeah.
is, yeah, it's kind of a cool thing. So I'm in my browser here and I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to more tools, developer tools. And this applies both for APIs, but also for, other pieces there. So I'm going to go here to network and I'm going to hit, do I have to do it again? Let me see. Do I have to turn it on first? Yep. So you can see that when I hit that, it started to record my information here. So I can actually see how long everything is happening. So let's go ahead and record this and we'll do another restart. And then let's see if we can expand it out here.
So it took 1.32 seconds to finish, looking at the console at the bottom.
Yep, yep,
Yep.
yep. So 06 requests, 31 KB was transferred.
Mhm.
How much resource, and it finished overall in 1.32 seconds.
And part
And
of the
that could,
time to finish is the data itself being transferred, if I
correct. You're
guess, right?
waiting. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
you'll see that this time, this is here I'm making the request
Yeah.
and then coming back from there. Now, what's cool is in here, this also gives you the amount of time it takes. So you'll see that this API request took a total of 658 milliseconds and was about 4.97 KB. So you can see exactly the results that come back here. So that's kind of a nice thing too, is you can test this. Part of the other thing that's going on here is that we're doing two things. First, we're making the call, then we're waiting for the data to come back, and then the browser needs to take a little time to redraw this. So the
Hmm.
whole amount of time here is longer because you have the amount of time it's taking to redraw the web page. In this case, using internal stuff there. But this is a nice tool to kind of see under the cover of what Alpha is doing, and what the time is for everything else there. And also within here, this also is a nice tool from there. There's some other cool things you can write tests. So like if you're doing testing, you can actually use this for testing. It's a really powerful tool, easy to use, free to start, and you'll dig it.
Fantastic. So we have two people who wrote in with the same question. So let's
Uh-huh.
just ignore that question and go on to the next one.
Yeah, I
No,
know.
I'm just
Let's
kidding.
not be.
All right. I love when that happened. They get to. So the question had to do with formatting. They said, well, okay, we saw the formatting and you switched to compact and you switched back, but is there any granular control? Is that like HTML? Can I just edit that in the view box?
Great point. So what I did here is that I used just the standard view box, but I'm going to go
Mhm.
ahead and here and click Freeform Editor.
Yeah.
So now what I'm seeing here is that it's added these nice little divs to do that kind of around, but now I can do anything I want with HTML. And we're going to kind of focus on that next week a little bit more. So I don't want to do too much in it, but
So
now
maybe
I
make
can,
description or something bold, because that might be a
yeah,
good one that you want to
exactly.
see.
Or like I could put in description
Oh
and
yeah.
just put in /b and then go here. You'll notice that built into here is an HTML editor with all the things you'd want to do with HTML. So you can see it just automatically will help you code that from that standpoint. Most likely you'll use a third-party tool and to actually do any of your HTML work because there's so many like real-time views of them. But you can go in here and put in my breaks. So I'll put my breaks here. We'll make this look a little differently. And so now let's do a preview. And again, little previews, it's making that call to that API and doing it here. But now you can see now, I've got description here. I can apply any classes to this. I can apply formatting. The sky's the limit. And that's again where view boxes really, really come into their own is your ability to use your own HTML and CSS to style it anyway. You're not limited by Alpha's built-in styling or
Mhm.
modifying that. You can literally have your own style layered on top of this thing and include it in there. Pretty straightforward.
Great. So come back here, freeform editor, and those things in the curly braces are just the placeholders that will be replaced by data when your view box is rendered.
Yep. And in fact, if you don't know what they are, you can just click here, insert field. And when you do
Great.
that, it inserts the proper name. And and I believe it is case sensitive. That's an important aspect too, is there's some case sensitivity. So I highly recommend using the insert to insert your items in there because then you know exactly the view box is mapping it to your data. Like if I go back to my data here real quick, and that's again, you're now into the client world, which is all JavaScript. If I go to my data source and I open up my sample data, you'll notice that each of my names here inside here are all uppercased. So I've made that mistake in the past where I had uppercase, but then in my template here for the view box layout, I put lowercase and nothing was showing.
Mm,
Actually, it would be right here is what. So what I did is I went in here and I said, oh, okay, yeah, well, I know I'll just put in cost because I know cost is a data element. Well, uppercase cost and lowercase cost are two different things. So actually we can preview and see what happens here. Notice I'm missing that data. And the reason why is it's looking in the JSON and saying, well, I don't see lowercase cost, so sorry, pal. So now if I go back in here and put uppercase cost, do my preview, my data is back. So just be wary that you're in case sensitivity world, um, because the JavaScript guys did it. Many,
fantastic.
many purists.
Also, wow, we're 38 minutes in, and I totally forgot to introduce Sarah joining us
I
today also.
know.
Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of
Jeez.
documentation, who gives us all the answers when we need them, is on with us today. So if you have questions, you might be putting answers in that chat window as well, or in that questions window. So welcome, Sarah. Sorry.
No worries. I'm
Um,
technically not Dave today.
I see listed here as not Dave McCormick as the login. Um, very good. So another question, I don't know if I missed this or not, but someone said that in the sample code you showed something which had a .json extension, but the endpoint doesn't reference a .json data file. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do endpoints, are they typically call files? Or they just typically end in a command,
Oh,
if I
okay.
recall.
So let's go ahead and go in here and let's like look at the anatomy of this
Hmm.
endpoint. Okay, so this tells me it's a secure, and that's the nice thing about Alpha Cloud HTTPS, because more and more browsers are starting to redirect traffic from non-S. So it's very important that you start moving towards secure endpoint, and that data is encrypted in flight, which is kind of nice too. So this is, and I'll show you in a moment, the URL, the website name automatically assigned to me when I created my application up on Alpha Cloud. So I named it something called AS API Sandbox, which is Alpha Sports API Sandbox. Very cryptic, but
Oh,
that's
clever.
you got to be that way.
Hmm.
So Alpha did that and appended and created there. Now, if you'll notice, what's after here is the meat of it, which is when I created, and let me just jump over here. When I'm over here, you'll notice that I created a web service called API.A5SVC. So the .A5 SVC is automatically created by Alpha. So I can call it anything I want. If I want to create a new REST service, I can come in here, add my class in here, add my products, to get. By the way, this is how it took me there. And I can save it and I can call it my cool API. Okay, so I've saved it. Now I've got two things here. I've got API and my cool API. But so therefore, if I deploy this, then that I would say my cool API. Because, you get to choose whatever name you there. Now, what this is here is so this is the service that's running. After that is the name here. So let's go ahead and go back over here. When I created API, I selected my class, which had my code in it. I exposed it, and this is where I can name the path here. So you'll see in it that it automatically picked up the name of my function in there, but you could name this anything you want. You can edit this, and I could literally edit this and call it anything else I want. It's makes it flexible here. So this is the last part. So if you think about it, this is just a collection of different functions that are run. Products happen to be one of those functions. And if I don't have to expose them. If I had more functions in my API XBasic, so if you'll notice, if I go back real quick, I go to my XBasic and go in here, you'll notice I really only have one function called products. That's the one I built here. But I could put multiple functions in there. Once I've added multiple functions, then I can go into my service, and say, I want to show these available methods, functions and methods interchangeable in terms of how to go there. By the way, to show you how cool, I'm just going to go ahead and go to Alpha Cloud. I'm going to publish this thing. So it's basically the same functionality. I just gave it a different endpoint here, but I just wanted to show you how cool. What's going on right now, if you haven't done Alpha Cloud, is that it's wrapped all my code. It's now moving it up to Alpha Cloud. So there's a two-step process where it basically packages everything up and then sends it up to the cloud. Now it's going to go on the cloud and it's going to go through the steps of actually called deploying, where it's setting up my server, setting up everything else. It's really, really pretty cool. So behind the scenes, it's doing all that work. And I could close this right now because Alpha Cloud is just going to do the work for me, but I'm going to go ahead and let it, refresh and do this here from that moment. So see, and a little laggy right now. So it's ruining my couple minutes, but see, now it's going here, showing you what it's doing. And there's a lot of stuff Alpha Cloud's doing. It's setting up your website. It's setting up what version of Alpha you're using. It's doing a whole bunch of other stuff that are just things you would normally have to do manually. You don't. But notice I'm done. So let's go have some fun. So I've deployed my new API. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to make a copy of this. All right, let's go ahead and let's see. How do I do that? I can just go into this thing. I can think I'll save this as 2. Okay. So, I see. Yep. So I've got my first one here, products, using that endpoint. Now I've got my second one, and I'm just going to go in here and what did I call it? I think I called it my cool API. And we hit send. Voila. It may seem overwhelming, but think about that. Alpha Cloud did all that stuff for me. I have now a full new API with a name and everything else and all that set up. And all I did was literally copy and, as you can see, I deployed my API in literally under 2 or 3 minutes. It was pretty fun. So that's why I'm using a lot more. But long story short, now this is my API. So I could go into my Viewbox and use that as the API endpoint and then, other pieces. But if I were to create more functions in my XBasic class to say, now let's give a list of customers or this or that, then those would be a different endpoint. This would stay the same, but then this would say maybe customers or orders or whatever it happens to be, because I'm basically mapping this endpoint to run a XBasic function or method, and Alpha Cloud and Alpha does all the rest for you. So it's pretty fun stuff. Okay.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so now we have a hard one.
Oh, good. I like those.
So this person wants to, this is really, I guess, a JavaScript question, but this person wants, when they do a mouse over on a item in their view box, to display maybe one of the data items or display something that was otherwise hidden about that item.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so I'm actually going to defer on that one because I'm going to be covering that under the items capability. So
Oh, right.
just a little tip right here is that when you're in your view box, so let's go, oh, wrong machine. Go over here. Okay. I can create what are called items. And I think we talked about it, but let me just go ahead and do one real quick. So I'll create it here, and then you'll notice that I've got different pieces here. Now, what's interesting is I'll have to do a little investigation on that, because remember, if you're doing hover, then you're on the, you're not going to do mobile because you can't hover your finger over something and have it
Right.
pop up. So
Yes.
just realize that you may be kind of tying yourself into a circle, especially if you want to go mobile, but you may have an existing desktop web scenario there. So in this case, what I'll probably have to do, and I'll do some research in it, is, and I wonder, is there well, that's a good question. Let's look at this real quick. JavaScript fire on hover over control or element. Actually, it's called element. Oh, there is, I think, a little bit. So what you can do is, that's triggered on. So you would have to, let's see, that's jQuery. So you may have to add a little jQuery to it. And you can add any of that into your thing over it. And there's a mouse over item here. So I'd have to like experiment. But so the built-in what are called items are triggered by these events here. But you can go in to your layout and you can go ahead and put in any standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript trip you want. In fact, you'll notice over here you have JavaScript. You can put your little code here and there. So my feeling is for that particular environment, you would have to go in here and say, okay, P. So I'm going to surround that with a P. Okay, then I'm going to go back in here and you'll see that ID other, and then they have this code in here that says the outer mouse over function does it here. So you would have to manually add an ID to your element. So I'd go in here to, let's go back here. I'd go like, ID equals product. Okay. Now that I have that, then I'd have to go back and figure out how this works. So I'll go ahead and grab, this function, and it's jQuery, which I don't have very much experience at. And so then, yeah, you got to include this script jQuery in there. You create these mouse over events, and then you need the script here that actually triggers it. But now, again, a little bit of merging work. But the cool thing about this is that once I have that in there, so let me go ahead and just take this script right here. I would probably have to put that in a function. You'll see that it's doing this, but I could take this. This is going to be hacky, so bear with me here. But I'm going to grab this script here, and I'm going to go back into here and put it in my JavaScript. But what I would most likely do is in here, now notice what happens is this little thing gets triggered on this mouse over function, and it's doing this. Well, in here, what I could do is say dialog.object, and or actually, let me show you how I do it, is that once I detected that event, I could create a JavaScript action. So you do it. And then in that JavaScript action, I would say, message, let's just do a message box. Now that I have that, I copy this code here. click OK. And then in here, instead of doing their stuff, I fire my stuff. So this is all stuff you'd have to figure out how mouse over works and what jQuery you have to insert into your environment. But then you can kind of mix and match standard jQuery with alphas built in. Then what happens is when this fires, when you mouse over it, then that's going to fire this action JavaScript, and then you can, pass to some data or do stuff and be able to handle it there. I know this sounds a little bit, but you're going to have to, since there's no built-in hover capability for items, you're going to have to do probably a jQuery, a little piece of jQuery in there, add the jQuery library. I think we might even include the jQuery library. I think as part of, we actually add it in there because we use it for other stuff underneath the covers or something like that. Have to find out about that. So again, quick wrap up. First step is to go out and find out, well, how do you do a mouse over on anything? What is the HTML, CSS, JavaScript way? Then you copy in the scripts that you need, and you copy in any, formatting or, things along those lines. Like for instance, we're taking in and we're, using the class here to show that information out. Then we paste that into the alpha Viewbox layout and into JavaScript, and then there's probably a little debugging, experimenting, and you'll get it to work from there. But you're kind of using, and that's again why the Viewbox is so cool. If I were to say, oh, it'd be so cool if I could do that with a standard X control, whatever, on alpha, like in the list control or something like that, it may well, if it's not built in, you kind of have certain limitations. But the Viewbox control allows you to do an enormous amount of this merging of external technologies and capabilities with alpha and leverage. I could just go leverage all this stuff that's already been done out there that's available out of the gate. So I hope that gives you some pointers. I know that doesn't exactly show you do step 1, 2, 3, but that is the process. Find out how you do it in the HTML, CSS world, and then just bring those capabilities into here. But then you can match it with, with the fact that you can put in, like if I go to my JavaScript again, I can use alpha kind of stuff to trigger list refreshes or lookups or viewbox refreshes or Ajax callbacks. Like when I hover over that, I want to send a callback to the server to do something. The sky is the limit. But you'll have to learn a little bit of JavaScript and you'll have to do a little insertion, but it's pretty straightforward, and a little bit of exercise, you'll be able to pull it off, no problem at all. Great question.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have run out of questions for today.
Okay, no problem.
5 minutes left, but I'll give people a moment to type one in. Otherwise, we can just break early, I guess.
We can have 5 minutes more, social distancing. So, yeah. Yeah, no, great question. There we go. E.add to add events. Oh, cool. Do you want to explain your, not David McCormick, Sarah? Actually, she's probably like, Dion, you're saying it all wrong, but she added a little comment into the chat window. Pretty neat about how you can add events to elements in your app in Alpha Anywhere. I'm going to have to look at that myself.
Oh, right there in the documentation window. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go over here.
Yep.
Excuse me, I apologize. Okay. So Sarah was outlining, and maybe you want to talk about a little bit more, but there's a built-in capability. We do include jQuery, don't we, in our pages? I think it's built in,
Isn't
right?
it an option in properties in the UX builder? Maybe Sarah can answer
so.
that.
Let's, or maybe not.
To answer your question, we use jQuery for a lot of stuff ourselves, so it's already integrated into the product.
Yeah, I know if we go to project query, I know in the project
properties, right?
Right. Yeah. And what's interesting is we're going to load the internal version. So Alpha ships with it kind of built into there because we depend on it. But you can use Google's, or jQuery's endpoint, and then it does a dynamic call to those places to bring in the jQuery libraries from there. So we fully support jQuery, which opens up an enormous amount of, a lot of people who are good designers out there know jQuery, so they can bring those techniques. But I want to go back here, and if you don't mind explaining a little bit of what this does, I want to know. I'm learning something new myself.
Oh, we have a number of core libraries, and one of them is this $e. The $ does not mean jQuery. It means something else in Alpha Anywhere. So that's just something you guys need to know when you're looking at jQuery code, is that you need to replace that $sign with the word jQuery and not use it directly. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But yeah, it's how we add events to things. The examples on that page are for demonstrate doing it on a raw like HTML page, but you can just delete the HTML portions and put things like the input into a view box, or even just spans or divs or p tags. But you can use it to add events to your layouts. You do not need to manually include core.js as the documentation describes. That's already included if you're doing this inside of a UX. If you do it in a standalone like A5W page, that's where you need to pull it in. But that's available to you. We also have an A5.u utility library full of a bunch of other things for adding in CSS classes on the fly, removing CSS classes on the fly, highlighting HTML content, and so on and so forth.
So cool, it works.
That's all there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You seem surprised. Our documentation is very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's not my documentation. That's why, if it were mine, I'd be very surprised if it worked. But no, it's pretty cool. Actually, that's then the answer is you can probably integrate this capability into your others. So I see what this is like. It's blurred. That's when you exit a field, I believe, is what blurred is, when you go out of a field, or when a field loses focus, I think is what gets triggered.
That's when it loses focus.
Yeah, so the way you would do this is you would grab this information, you would go over, now see blurred, I wonder what the hover over, you'd have to do a little more research on that, but then
we
go
have
into
a
your
full
view
list
box.
of what you can use on that.
On the documentation page.
Oh, cool. Let me go up here.
Mm-hmm.
There are others too. It's up in the top.
Oh, okay.
It's basically like a one-to-one, not a one-to-one, but a pretty close of like directly calling into the JavaScript API on events. So if new things are added over time to the DOM, what's available for events in HTML, in theory, they should just work.
Cool.
Let's see if we can break this.
Mouse over. Yeah, what do you think?
Okay, I wonder what this need to be. I'm going to guess. I'm just going to put mouse over everywhere. Probably won't work, but that's neat because that makes it so simple, because in this function here, then you can talk like do that dialogue. You can do anything from there. So let's go ahead and save that. We're chewing up that last 5 minutes here.
Very well.
But no, that's great. No, I never knew that. And jQuery is enormously, see? Check it out.
Wow.
See, it's not working on that one, but that one. I had to click though. Interesting. So maybe it's still a trap.
On the control, you'll have to.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Like not all events are available for all HTML elements.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and do here. Let's try. Let's just make that a text. Well, I'm out of my league at this point in time, but
I think that points us in a good direction. Sarah, thanks very much for adding that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's huge. This is the direction to go, and you can see the code. This is why we should
introduce Sarah at the very beginning of the show.
Yeah.
I think it's, sorry
totally.
about that.
So do you notice it's that you have to have this in your header? By the way, if you need all this stuff on any of your alpha web pages, or on a UX, you're going to use it inside of a UX. You can actually go to
you don't need to include the core.js in the UX. It's already included. We use this as an internal function that $e, along with all that other stuff in our core library, is used internally by the UX already. You only have to include that script header if you're doing something like an A5W page like this, where you're not including anything else.
So all you really need to do is go here, go to JavaScript functions and paste it there. And then those functions will be now available to everything in there. Very cool. Oh, add the event. I wonder what that does. So this must run when the UX runs. So I would actually do this to make this simple. So this, I'd put that function there, but then this, what I would do is I would go here, I would take it out here because this is just a function now that it's just built in, that's available. But I go to the server side event and I can say e.javascript is equal to JS. And so what will happen is once this UX is fired up, it will spit out and run this JavaScript on the device, which then in this case, it looks like it adds a watch thing to a control. It's something in jQuery. But this is, this needs to be fired because I look at this code, what's happening is when this web page runs, it creates this function, but then it actually executes this JavaScript when this page runs, which now sets everything up to work. So in order for me to be able to run that, I just go into the onDialog initialize event and then spit it out in eJavaScript. And what happens is when the UX runs, it's going to do all its thing to set everything up. Then it's going to spit out this little piece of JavaScript, and you can do that anything you want within it. And that way, then that JavaScript runs, everything's attached, and you're good to go. So super flexible. And then you put the rest in your Viewbox.
Excellent. Well, we are in fact out of time. Dan, thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for all your help. And thanks for everyone who wrote in, especially people who wrote in with questions, but anyone who attended. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. In the meantime, keep safe, stay healthy, and if you need to reach us, we're guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks again. Bye-bye.